Hey everyone. Tonight we're diving into humanity's first cosmic love affair, the ancient art of worshipping giant flaming balls of gas and rocky satellites while pretending they personally cared about your harvest. We're talking about why our ancestors looked up at the sky and decided, you know what? That big bright thing definitely wants me to build a pyramid. So before we journey back to when people sacrificed perfectly good livestock to ensure the sun didn't quit its day job, go ahead and hit that like button if you're ready for some celestial drama. And drop a comment letting me know what time zone you're watching from. Because apparently humans have been obsessed with tracking time since we first noticed that glowing orb had a schedule. Now settle in, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's explore how our ancestors turned basic survival anxiety into the world's first space program, complete with stone computers, ritual sacrifice, and the kind of astronomical precision that would make NASA engineers weep with professional jealousy. So you think ancient people were primitive for worshipping the sun and moon? Adorable. Truly, like thinking you could navigate the Pacific Ocean with a smartphone and good intentions. Welcome to the dawn of human consciousness, roughly 40,000 years ago, when our ancestors looked up at the sky and had what might be history's first existential crisis. Picture this, you're an early human, fresh off the evolutionary assembly line, standing outside your cave at sunrise. You've got opposable thumbs, a rudimentary grasp of fire, and absolutely no idea why that blazing orb in the sky keeps disappearing every night like it's got somewhere better to be. This wasn't just casual stargazing. This was survival, level anxiety with a cosmic twist. Because when you're living in a world where everything wants to eat you, darkness isn't just inconvenient, it's a death sentence with teeth. So when that golden disk rolled across the heavens each day, bringing warmth, light, and the ability to see that saber-toothed tiger before it saw you, well, it didn't take a PhD in anthropology to figure out this sun thing was pretty important. Our ancestors weren't stupid. They were actually remarkably observant, which is what kept them alive long enough to become our ancestors in the first place. They noticed patterns that would make modern meteorologists weep with envy. The sun rose, the sun set, and everything good in their lives happened in between. Plants grew, animals came out to be hunted, and you could actually see where you were going without stepping on something poisonous or carnivorous. But here's where it gets interesting. These early humans didn't just notice the sun's practical benefits, they started attributing personality to it. The sun became more than a celestial object, it became a being, a presence, something with intentions and moods. When the sun shone brightly, it was happy. When clouds covered it, it was angry or sad. When winter came and the sun seemed weak and distant, it was clearly going through some cosmic depression that needed addressing. This anthropomorphization wasn't just primitive thinking. It was the beginning of religion itself. Because once you start believing that natural phenomena have personalities, you start wondering if you can negotiate with them. And thus was born humanity's first customer service relationship with the universe, which has been about as successful as you'd expect. The moon presented an even more intriguing mystery. Unlike the sun, which was relatively predictable in its daily routine, the moon was clearly having an identity crisis. One night it was a thin sliver, the next it was growing, then it was gloriously full. Then it started shrinking again, until it disappeared entirely like some cosmic magic trick. For people who were just figuring out that putting seeds in the ground made plants grow, this shape-shifting nighttime companion was either divine or seriously concerning. But our ancestors were nothing if not practical mystics. They noticed that the moon's phases correlated with other patterns in their world. Women's menstrual cycles seemed to dance to the moon's rhythm. Tides rose and fell with lunar precision. Even animal behavior shifted with the moon's phases. The moon wasn't just changing shape for its own amusement. It was conducting an orchestra of earthly events with all the subtlety of a cosmic DJ. In ancient Mesopotamia, around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians developed what might be history's first comprehensive solar and lunar worship system. They didn't just casually acknowledge the sun and moon. They built their entire civilization around them. The sun god Shamash wasn't just a deity. He was the supreme judge, the all-seeing eye who watched over contracts, laws, and justice. This made perfect sense, because the sun literally illuminated everything. If you were going to have a god who could see all your sins, you'd want it to be the one celestial body that actually could see everything during daylight hours. Shamash was depicted as a bearded figure with rays shooting from his shoulders, holding a ring and rod symbolizing justice. He wasn't just worshipped, he was consulted on legal matters, business deals, and moral dilemmas. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the world's first written legal systems, was supposedly given directly by Shamash to King Hammurabi. This means that some of humanity's earliest laws came with a divine endorsement from a solar-powered judiciary system. The moon god Sin, meanwhile, was portrayed as a wise old man with a long beard and a crescent moon as his symbol. But Sin wasn't just about nighttime illumination, he was the god of time itself. The Sumerians used lunar calendars, dividing time into months based on the moon's cycles. Sin was essentially the cosmic timekeeper, the ultimate scheduler who determined when festivals would happen, when crops should be planted, and when armies should march to war. But the Mesopotamians weren't content with just worshipping celestial bodies. They wanted to understand them, predict them, and maybe get on their good side through strategic gift-giving. They built ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that weren't just temples but astronomical observatories. These weren't your casual weekend stargazing setups. These were industrial-strength celestial monitoring stations, complete with astronomers who tracked planetary movements with the dedication of modern sports statisticians. The priests didn't just observe the heavens, they recorded everything in cuneiform on clay tablets, creating what were essentially the world's first astronomical databases. They tracked the sun's position throughout the year, mapped the moon's phases, and even predicted eclipses with remarkable accuracy. When they successfully predicted that the sun would temporarily disappear during a solar eclipse, their credibility as intermediaries between humans and gods reached legendary status. Nothing says divine connection quite like successfully forecasting the temporary death and resurrection of the sun god. Egypt, meanwhile, took solar worship to a whole new level of architectural intimidation. The Egyptians didn't just honor the sun, they built monuments to it that still make engineers weep with inadequacy thousands of years later. Ra, the sun god, wasn't just a deity, he was the king of gods, the supreme ruler whose daily journey across the sky was a cosmic drama that determined the fate of Egypt itself. But Ra's story wasn't just about shining brightly and looking impressive. Every night, according to Egyptian mythology, Ra had to journey through the underworld, fighting the serpent Apep in a battle between light and darkness. This wasn't a metaphorical struggle, this was considered the literal reason why the sun disappeared each night. Ra was down in the underworld, sword in hand, fighting cosmic evil to ensure he could rise again the next morning. This nightly battle gave solar worship a distinctly heroic flavor. Ra wasn't just a passive light source, he was a warrior god who fought for humanity's survival every single night. The sunrise wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was Ra's victory celebration, proof that good had triumphed over evil once again. When you think about it from this perspective, every dawn was basically a divine action movie sequel, and the Egyptians were the devoted fans showing up for each installment. The pyramids weren't just tombs, they were solar alignment devices of mind, bending precision. The Great Pyramid at Giza is aligned so perfectly with cardinal directions and celestial movements that it makes modern GPS systems look like rough estimates. The pyramid's sides face true north with an accuracy of just 3/68 of a degree. The descending passage is aligned with the northern pole star as it appeared in 2500 BCE. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional astronomical engineering on a scale that suggests the Egyptians took their solar worship very, very seriously. The pharaohs weren't just kings, they were considered living embodiments of Ra's power on Earth. When a pharaoh died, he was said to join Ra in his solar boat, sailing across the sky each day for eternity. This meant that Egyptian royal burials weren't just about preserving the body. They were about preparing the pharaoh for his new job as a junior solar deity. The elaborate burial chambers, treasure-filled tombs, and complex mummification processes were essentially the world's most expensive job training programs. But while Egypt was busy building monuments that could be seen from space, other cultures were developing their own relationships with solar and lunar deities that were equally intense, but often more personal. In ancient Greece, Helios drove the sun chariot across the sky each day, a job that apparently came with significant stress and occupational hazards. His son Phaethon famously borrowed the chariot for a joyride and nearly burned down the entire world, which led to Zeus having to kill him with a lightning bolt to prevent global catastrophe. This myth served as both explanation for why summers could be brutally hot and as history's first recorded case of cosmic road rage. Apollo, who later became associated with the sun, represented a more refined solar deity. He wasn't just about light and heat. He was the god of music, poetry, prophecy, and healing. This made him popular with artists, who apparently decided that if you were going to worship a sun god, you might as well pick one with good taste in literature. Apollo's temple at Delphi became the most famous oracle site in the ancient world, where the Pythia would inhale mysterious vapors and deliver cryptic prophecies that were probably more accurate than modern political polling. The Greeks also gave us Artemis, the moon goddess and Apollo's twin sister, who was about as different from her sunny brother as you could get. While Apollo was associated with civilization, music, and rational thought, Artemis ruled the wilderness, the hunt, and all things wild and untamed. She was fiercely independent, eternally virginal, and had a tendency to turn men into deer and set her hunting dogs on them if they annoyed her. This made her popular with feminists several thousand years before feminism was officially invented. But Artemis wasn't just about divine retribution and forest management. She was also the protector of women in childbirth, which connected her lunar nature to the cycles of female fertility. Ancient Greek women would pray to Artemis during labor, hoping the moon goddess would ease their pain and ensure safe delivery. This gave lunar worship a distinctly feminine character that contrasted with the often masculine solar deities, creating a cosmic gender balance that influenced religious thought for millennia. The Romans, being Romans, took the Greek solar and lunar deities and gave them a distinctly imperial makeover. Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, became the official deity of the Roman Empire under Emperor Aurelian in 274 CE. This wasn't just religious reform, it was military strategy. By declaring the sun god unconquerable, Rome was essentially saying that their empire, blessed by Sol Invictus, was similarly invincible. It was cosmic propaganda with a solar theme song. Sol Invictus became so central to Roman identity that his birthday, December 25th, was made an official holiday. When Christianity later became the official religion of Rome, this solar celebration was conveniently transformed into Christmas, making Jesus' birthday coincide with the traditional celebration of the unconquered sun. This wasn't accidental. It was religious marketing at its finest, rebranding solar worship as Christian celebration with remarkable success. Diana, the Roman version of Artemis, maintained her lunar associations but gained additional responsibilities as the goddess of crossroads, magic, and necromancy. Roman lunar worship became more mysterious, more focused on the hidden knowledge that came with darkness and the secret wisdom of the night. Luna, the pure moon goddess, drove her silver chariot across the night sky, but Diana was the one you prayed to when you needed something done in the shadows. Meanwhile, in the northern forests of Europe, Celtic and Germanic tribes were developing their own intensely personal relationships with solar and lunar deities that made Mediterranean sun worship look positively restrained. The Celts gave us Lu, a solar deity who wasn't just the god of light, but also of skill, crafts, and excellence in all forms. Lu was the divine perfectionist, the god you invoked when you wanted to be the best at something, whether that was metalworking, poetry, or cleaving your enemies in two with supernatural precision. Celtic solar festivals were community events that lasted for days and involved entire tribes in celebrations that combined religious devotion with what can only be described as Iron Age party planning. Lugnasad, the harvest festival honouring Lugh, wasn't just a religious observance. It was a combination county fair, Olympic Games, and harvest celebration rolled into one massive event. There were competitions in every skill imaginable: craftsmanship, poetry, storytelling, martial arts, horse racing, and contests of strength that would make modern strongman competitions look like casual workouts. The Celts understood that the sun wasn't just a distant deity. It was intimately connected to their daily survival. The solar festivals marked crucial agricultural periods: when to plant, when to harvest, when to prepare for winter. But these weren't just practical observances. They were community bonding experiences that reinforced tribal identity and cultural values. When you've spent 3 days celebrating the sun god with everyone you've ever met, you're not just worshipping. You're building social cohesion that could last through the darkest winter months. Germanic tribes gave us a solar mythology that was simultaneously more violent and more fatalistic than anything the Mediterranean world had produced. Sol, their sun goddess, yes, goddess, making Germanic solar worship distinctly feminine, didn't just shine peacefully across the sky. She was being chased by wolves who were constantly trying to devour her. Every night, they nearly succeeded. And every dawn was proof that she had outrun them once again. But this wasn't a story of eternal victory. Germanic mythology included Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, when the wolves would finally catch Sol and devour her permanently. The sun would die, the world would end, and even the gods themselves would perish in the final battle. This made Germanic solar worship simultaneously celebratory and melancholic. Every sunrise was a gift, but it was also a reminder that all gifts were temporary. The moon in Germanic mythology was Mani, a male lunar deity who was also being chased by wolves. This gave Germanic lunar worship the same urgency and poignancy as their solar traditions. The moon phases weren't just celestial cycles. They were evidence of an ongoing cosmic chase scene that would eventually end in universal darkness. This mythological framework created a culture that valued every moment of light, every successful harvest, every peaceful day as precious because it was finite. Germanic tribes didn't just worship the sun and moon. They grieved for them in advance, celebrating their light while preparing for their inevitable loss. It was perhaps the most emotionally complex solar and lunar worship system ever developed, combining hope and despair in equal measure. In the Americas, solar and lunar worship reached levels of architectural and mathematical sophistication that made European achievements look like amateur hour. The Maya developed a calendar system so accurate that it's more precise than the Gregorian calendar we use today. This wasn't casual astronomy. This was celestial mathematics at a level that suggests Maya priests were essentially running NASA thousands of years before NASA existed. Kinichohao, the Maya sun god, wasn't just worshipped, he was calculated. Maya priests tracked his movements with obsessive precision, predicting eclipses, solstices, and Venus transits with accuracy that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the invention of modern telescopes. The pyramid at Chichen Itza is essentially a massive solar calculator, designed so that during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the shadow of the feathered serpent Kukulkan appears to crawl down the northern stairway. This wasn't just religious theatre. It was public demonstration of astronomical expertise that proved the priests could literally make the gods appear on command. Ixchel, the Maya moon goddess, was associated with weaving, childbirth, and medicine, connecting lunar cycles to the practical rhythms of women's lives. But Maya lunar worship went beyond symbolism. They used lunar calculations for agricultural planning, military campaigns, and royal ceremonies with precision that suggests they understood the moon's gravitational effects on everything from tides to plant growth long before European science officially recognized these connections. The Aztecs elevated solar worship to levels that made other cultures look positively casual about their celestial devotion. Huitzilopochtli, their sun god, wasn't just the source of light. He was a warrior deity locked in eternal combat with darkness. Every dawn represented his victory over the forces of night, but this victory required constant reinforcement through human sacrifice on a scale that made other ancient practices look like gentle suggestions. Aztec priests didn't just offer prayers to the sun, they offered hearts, still beating, torn from living chests to ensure that Huitzilopochtli had the strength to fight darkness for another day. The great temple in Tenochtitlan was essentially a solar-powered slaughterhouse, where thousands of people were sacrificed annually to keep the sun rising. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. This was cosmic maintenance, performed by people who genuinely believed that without their intervention, the sun would fail to rise and the world would end in eternal darkness. Coyolxauhqui, the Aztec moon goddess, represented the flip side of this cosmic drama. According to myth, she was the sister of Huitzilopochtli, who tried to kill him before his birth. In the ensuing battle, Huitzilopochtli dismembered her and threw her head into the sky, where it became the moon. This violent origin story meant that every full moon was a reminder of divine family dysfunction and the price of challenging solar authority. The Inca took solar worship to its logical conclusion by declaring their emperor, the Sapa Inca, to be the literal son of Inti, the sun god. This wasn't metaphorical. This was official government policy. The emperor wasn't just divinely appointed, he was divinely manufactured, a walking piece of the sun who ruled by cosmic birthright rather than political authority. Machu Picchu, the famous lost city of the Inca, was built as a royal estate and solar observatory where the emperor could commune directly with his celestial father. The Intihuatana stone, carved to precise astronomical specifications, was designed to tie the sun during the winter solstice, ensuring that it would begin its return journey towards summer. The Inca believed that without this ceremony, performed by the emperor himself, the sun might continue moving south until it disappeared entirely, ending all life on Earth. This gave Inca solar worship a distinctly governmental character. Religious observance wasn't separate from political authority, it was the foundation of political authority. The emperor's primary job wasn't military conquest or economic management, although he did plenty of both. His primary job was maintaining cosmic order through precise ritual observance that kept the sun functioning properly. Mama Quilla, the Inca moon goddess and wife of Inti, was responsible for time measurement and women's affairs. But her worship wasn't just ceremonial. Inca women served as priestesses in her temples, called mamaconas, who were responsible for weaving the finest textiles, brewing ceremonial beer, and maintaining the sacred fires that burned continuously in honor of both solar and lunar deities. In Asia, solar and lunar worship took on philosophical dimensions that made Western approaches seem almost primitive by comparison. In ancient China, the sun and moon weren't just deities, they were manifestations of universal principles that governed everything from imperial politics to personal behavior. Yang, associated with the sun, represented active, masculine, aggressive principles. Yin, associated with the moon, represented passive, feminine, receptive principles. But this wasn't a simple good versus evil dualism. Chinese philosophy understood that yang and yin were complementary forces that needed each other to maintain cosmic balance. Pure yang would burn everything to ash. Pure yin would freeze everything into inaction. The goal wasn't to choose sides, but to achieve harmony between solar and lunar principles in both society and individual behavior. Chinese emperors ruled under the mandate of heaven, which made them responsible for maintaining the balance between yang and yin forces in their realm. Natural disasters, eclipses, or unseasonable weather were interpreted as evidence that the emperor had allowed cosmic forces to become unbalanced, potentially justifying rebellion and dynastic change. This made Chinese solar and lunar worship simultaneously mystical and political, with real-world consequences for imperial authority. The Chinese lunar calendar became the foundation for agricultural planning, festival scheduling, and governmental administration throughout East Asia. But it wasn't just practical, it was philosophical. Each lunar month represented a different balance of yin and yang forces, requiring different approaches to work, relationships, and personal cultivation. Chinese solar and lunar worship became a comprehensive lifestyle system that influenced everything from diet to military strategy. In Japan, Amaterasu, the sun goddess, became the divine ancestor of the imperial family, making the emperor not just politically supreme, but genetically connected to solar divinity. This wasn't adoption or appointment. This was cosmic inheritance that couldn't be revoked or transferred. Japanese solar worship became the foundation of national identity, with the rising sun flag literally representing the goddess herself. Tsukuyomi, the Japanese moon god, represented the night, the mysterious, and the realm of spirits and dreams. Japanese lunar worship focused on the connection between moonlight and spiritual insight, with many religious practices scheduled for full moon nights, when the barrier between physical and spiritual worlds was considered thinnest. In India, Surya, the sun god, was worshipped as the divine physician who could cure diseases and grant longevity through proper solar meditation and ritual observance. The Surya Namaskara, or sun salutation, became a foundational yoga practice that combined physical exercise with solar worship in a daily routine that connected personal health to cosmic devotion. Chandra, the lunar deity, was associated with the mind, emotions, and the subtle aspects of consciousness. Indian lunar worship recognized the moon's influence on mental states and developed elaborate systems of meditation, mantra recitation, and ritual observance designed to harmonize human consciousness with lunar cycles. But perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of solar and lunar worship came from the realization that these weren't just religious practices. They were early attempts at scientific understanding wrapped in mythological language. Ancient peoples didn't separate science from religion because they didn't see them as different categories. Observing celestial movements, predicting seasons, and understanding natural cycles were simultaneously practical skills and religious acts. The priest astronomers of ancient cultures were essentially the world's first scientists, using observation, record keeping, and mathematical calculation to understand natural phenomena. But they weren't trying to eliminate the sacred from their investigations. They were trying to understand the sacred more precisely. When they successfully predicted an eclipse, they weren't proving that gods didn't exist. They were demonstrating their understanding of divine patterns. This integration of empirical observation with religious devotion created some of humanity's greatest architectural and intellectual achievements. The pyramids, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat, and countless other monuments weren't just temples. They were precision instruments for celestial observation. Massive stone computers designed to track and predict cosmic movements with accuracy that wouldn't be surpassed for thousands of years. Solar and lunar worship also provided psychological and social benefits that pure scientific observation couldn't match. Watching the sunrise while believing it represented the daily victory of light over darkness gave people hope during difficult periods. Gathering to celebrate the full moon created community bonds that enhanced survival during harsh winters. Marking the seasons with solar festivals provided structure and meaning to agricultural cycles that might otherwise seem like endless repetitions of planting and harvesting. These religious practices also encoded practical knowledge in memorable form. Solar festivals reminded people when to plant crops, when to harvest, when to prepare for winter. Lunar celebrations marked the optimal times for various agricultural activities. Celestial myths preserved astronomical knowledge in stories that could be passed down through generations without writing systems. The gradual decline of solar and lunar worship coincided with the rise of more abstract religious concepts, and, eventually, scientific explanations for celestial phenomena. But this wasn't simply progress replacing primitive beliefs. In many ways, humanity lost something valuable when we stopped experiencing the sun and moon as personal, intentional beings who cared about our welfare. Modern people know far more about solar fusion, lunar geology, and astronomical mechanics than any ancient priest, astronomer. But we've largely lost the emotional connection to celestial cycles that provided meaning, hope, and community cohesion for our ancestors. We understand the mechanics of sunrise, but we rarely experience it as a daily miracle worth celebrating. The psychological impact of losing this connection may be more significant than we realize. Ancient peoples lived in intimate relationship with natural cycles, marking time by lunar phases and seasonal changes that connected their personal rhythms to cosmic patterns. Modern urban life, with its artificial lighting and climate-controlled environments, largely disconnects us from these natural cycles. Research suggests that this disconnection may contribute to various psychological and physical health problems, from seasonal affective disorder to disrupted circadian rhythms. Ancient solar and lunar worship may have inadvertently provided therapeutic benefits that we're only beginning to understand through modern chronobiology and environmental psychology. The festivals, ceremonies, and daily observances of solar and lunar worship also provided regular opportunities for community gathering, artistic expression, and cultural transmission that strengthened social bonds and preserved cultural knowledge. The decline of these practices may have contributed to the social isolation and cultural fragmentation that characterizes much of modern life. Some contemporary movements are attempting to revive elements of solar and lunar worship, not as literal religious practices, but as ways to reconnect with natural cycles and restore meaning to daily life. Modern paganism, nature-based spirituality, and various New Age practices often incorporate solar and lunar observances, though usually without the complex astronomical knowledge and community integration that characterized ancient practices. The environmental movement has also rediscovered some of the wisdom embedded in ancient solar worship. Recognition of our dependence on solar energy, whether directly through photosynthesis or indirectly through fossil fuels formed by ancient solar energy, has led to renewed appreciation for the sun as the ultimate source of all life on Earth. Climate change concerns have made the sun's power and our relationship with it a matter of survival once again. Similarly, growing understanding of lunar influences on biological cycles, from coral spawning to human sleep patterns, has led to renewed scientific interest in lunar effects that ancient peoples took for granted. Modern chronobiology has validated many traditional beliefs about lunar influences, though usually in more subtle forms than ancient myths suggested. The ancient practice of solar and lunar worship represented humanity's first systematic attempt to understand our place in the cosmos and to live in harmony with natural forces beyond our control. These weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated systems that integrated empirical observation, practical knowledge, artistic expression, community building, and psychological well-being into comprehensive worldviews that sustained civilizations for millennia. While we can't and shouldn't return to literal belief in solar and lunar deities, we might benefit from recovering some of the attitudes and practices that made these ancient traditions psychologically and socially valuable. Regular attention to celestial cycles, community celebration of natural phenomena, and recognition of our dependence on cosmic forces beyond human control might help address some of the alienation and environmental disconnection that characterize modern life. The sun still rises every morning, just as it did for our ancestors. The moon still cycles through its phases, just as it has for billions of years. These celestial phenomena haven't lost their power or beauty. We've simply stopped paying attention to them in ways that connect them to our daily lives and deepest concerns. Perhaps the real lesson of ancient solar and lunar worship isn't about the existence of celestial deities, but about the importance of maintaining conscious, grateful relationship with the cosmic forces that make our existence possible. Whether we call it science, spirituality, or simple awareness, recognition of our dependence on the sun's energy and our connection to lunar cycles represents wisdom that transcends any particular religious or cultural framework. In the end, our ancestors worshipped the sun and moon because they understood something we sometimes forget. We are not separate from the cosmos, but intimately connected to it. Every breath we take depends on plant photosynthesis, powered by solar energy. Every tide that shapes our coastlines responds to lunar gravitational pull. Every season that brings renewal or rest follows patterns. established by our planet's relationship with its celestial companions. The ancient practice of solar and lunar worship was humanity's way of acknowledging this connection, celebrating it, and organizing individual and community life around it. Whether expressed through Egyptian pyramid building, Maya calendar calculations, Celtic seasonal festivals, or countless other cultural forms, this practice represented a fundamental understanding that human life is embedded within larger cosmic processes that deserve our attention, respect, and gratitude. We may not need to sacrifice hearts to keep the sun rising or build monuments aligned with lunar phases, but we might benefit from recovering some of the wonder and reverence that motivated our ancestors to develop such elaborate relationships with the celestial bodies that continue to govern our lives in ways both obvious and subtle. Consider the practical genius embedded in ancient solar and lunar observations. Long before GPS, smartphones, or weather apps, our ancestors used celestial movements as their primary navigation and timing systems. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using star patterns, lunar phases, and solar positions with accuracy that would shame modern sailors dependent on electronic instruments. They didn't just worship these celestial bodies. They partnered with them in feats of exploration that spread human civilization across the Pacific. Viking seafarers used similar celestial navigation techniques, combined with solar worship traditions that gave their voyages spiritual significance beyond mere exploration or conquest. When Eric the Red sailed to Greenland or Leif Erikson reached North America, they weren't just following trade routes. They were following divine guidance provided by their solar and lunar deities. The sun compass found in Viking archaeological sites wasn't just a tool. It was a sacred instrument that connected practical navigation with religious devotion. These ancient navigation traditions highlight something we've largely forgotten: the integration of spiritual practice with practical skill that made both more effective. Modern sailors learn celestial navigation as a backup skill, something to fall back on if their electronics fail. Ancient navigators experienced celestial observation as communion with divine forces that actively guided their journeys. This psychological difference may have made them more attentive observers and more confident voyagers. The agricultural applications of solar and lunar worship were similarly sophisticated. The Inca developed farming techniques that maximized solar exposure on mountain terraces while using lunar timing for planting and harvesting different crops. Their agricultural success wasn't just due to terracing technology. It was due to understanding how celestial cycles affected plant growth at different altitudes and in different microclimates. Medieval European monasteries preserved and developed agricultural techniques that combined Christian prayer schedules with older solar and lunar observances. Monks rose for prayers at dawn, not just for spiritual reasons, but because dawn was the optimal time for agricultural planning and animal care. Their religious calendar, with its seasons of fasting and feasting, aligned with natural cycles of scarcity and abundance that helped communities survive variable harvest conditions. The medical applications of ancient solar and lunar worship are particularly intriguing from a modern perspective. Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and various European folk healing traditions all incorporated celestial timing into their therapeutic approaches. Certain herbs were considered most potent when gathered at specific lunar phases. Surgical procedures were scheduled according to celestial conditions that were believed to affect healing outcomes. While much of this may seem like superstition, modern chronobiology has validated some aspects of these ancient practices. Human immune function, hormone production, and cellular repair processes all follow circadian rhythms synchronized with solar cycles. Some surgical outcomes do correlate with lunar phases, possibly due to gravitational effects on bodily fluids or electromagnetic influences that we don't fully understand. Ancient peoples may have observed these connections empirically without understanding their mechanisms. Their ritual prescriptions for optimal timing of medical procedures, while expressed in religious language, may have contained practical wisdom that modern medicine is only beginning to rediscover through scientific research. The social organization benefits of solar and lunar worship extended far beyond religious observance. These practices created shared calendars that coordinated community activities, trade relationships, and political alliances across vast distances. When different tribes or civilizations shared similar solar festivals, they could synchronize meetings, markets, and diplomatic negotiations without complex communication systems. The great trade networks that connected ancient civilizations, the Silk Road, Trans-Saharan routes, Mediterranean commerce, all depended on shared understanding of seasonal cycles and celestial timing. Merchants from different cultures could meet at predetermined locations during specific lunar phases or solar seasons, creating reliable commercial relationships that transcended linguistic and cultural barriers. Solar and lunar festivals also served as information networks that spread technological innovations, cultural practices, and historical knowledge across enormous distances. When people gathered to celebrate celestial events, they shared stories, techniques, and ideas that might otherwise never have crossed tribal or national boundaries. These religious gatherings functioned as ancient versions of scientific conferences, cultural exchanges, and trade shows rolled into single events. The artistic achievements inspired by solar and lunar worship represent some of humanity's greatest creative accomplishments. The geometric precision of Islamic architectural patterns, designed to capture and reflect sunlight in specific ways throughout the day, required mathematical understanding that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. The acoustic properties of Gothic cathedrals were designed to enhance the experience of dawn services, creating architectural spaces that used solar timing to optimize spiritual and aesthetic effects. Mayan sculptural programs at sites like Palenque and Copan incorporated astronomical alignments that created shadow plays telling mythological stories throughout the year. These weren't just decorative elements. They were three-dimensional calendars that made abstract celestial knowledge visible and memorable for general populations who couldn't read hieroglyphic texts. The musical traditions associated with solar and lunar worship created rhythmic and harmonic systems that influenced musical development worldwide. Ancient Greek understanding of mathematical ratios in music was directly connected to their observations of celestial harmonies. The idea that planetary movements created music, the music of the spheres, wasn't just poetic metaphor, but reflected sophisticated understanding of mathematical relationships between astronomical cycles and acoustic phenomena. Indian classical music developed raga systems that correspond to different times of day and seasons, creating musical expressions of solar and lunar cycles that were believed to harmonize human consciousness with cosmic rhythms. These weren't arbitrary associations, but reflected careful observation of how different musical patterns affected human psychology and physiology under different celestial conditions. The psychological benefits of ancient solar and lunar worship may be the most relevant aspect for modern people struggling with anxiety, depression, and existential meaninglessness. Regular attention to celestial cycles provided a sense of connection to something larger than individual concerns, creating perspective that helped people cope with personal difficulties and mortality fears. The daily practice of sunrise observation or evening moon watching created meditation, like states that reduced stress and promoted mental clarity. Ancient peoples didn't have formal psychotherapy, but they had religious practices that provided many of the same benefits: regular contemplation, community support, connection to transcendent meaning, and structured ways of processing difficult emotions. The seasonal festivals associated with solar worship provided regular opportunities for emotional expression, social bonding, and cultural renewal that helped communities maintain psychological resilience during challenging periods. These celebrations weren't just entertainment. They were therapeutic interventions that helped people process grief, celebrate achievements, and maintain hope during dark times. Modern research on seasonal affective disorder has validated ancient understanding of connections between solar exposure and mental health. Light therapy, now prescribed by psychiatrists, recreates the intentional solar exposure that was built into ancient religious practices. The therapeutic benefits weren't accidental side effects. They were central purposes of these traditions. The ecological wisdom embedded in solar and lunar worship traditions is particularly relevant as we face contemporary environmental crises. Ancient peoples understood that human activities needed to align with natural cycles to remain sustainable over long periods. Their religious calendars created rhythms of activity and rest that prevented overexploitation of natural resources. Many indigenous cultures that maintained traditional solar and lunar observances also maintained sustainable relationships with their environments for thousands of years. This wasn't just because they lacked industrial technology. It was because their religious worldviews made environmental destruction literally unthinkable. You don't pollute the home of gods you depend on for survival. The decline of these traditions coincided with the rise of religious and philosophical systems that emphasized human dominion over nature rather than partnership with it. While this shift enabled technological advancement and population growth, it also created the alienation from natural cycles that contributes to contemporary environmental problems. Some modern environmental movements are rediscovering wisdom embedded in ancient solar and lunar worship traditions. Permaculture practices often incorporate lunar planting schedules and solar energy optimization techniques that mirror ancient agricultural methods. Sustainable architecture increasingly uses passive solar design principles that were central to ancient temple construction. The timing of modern environmental activism often follows patterns established by ancient seasonal festivals. Earth Day coincides with spring equinox celebrations. Harvest festivals have evolved into farmers' markets and local food movements. These connections aren't accidental. They reflect enduring human needs to align personal and community activities with natural cycles. The intellectual achievements inspired by solar and lunar worship laid foundations for mathematics, astronomy, and engineering that continue to influence modern science and technology. The geometric principles developed for temple construction became fundamental to architecture and engineering. The mathematical systems created for calendar calculation became essential to commerce and navigation. Ancient understanding of cyclical time, developed through careful observation of celestial movements, provided conceptual frameworks that enabled later scientific discoveries about natural processes, evolutionary changes, and physical laws. The idea that natural phenomena follow predictable patterns, central to all scientific thinking, was first developed through religious observation of solar and lunar cycles. The instruments created for celestial observation, astrolabes, sundials, lunar calendars, were humanity's first precision scientific equipment. The methods developed for recording and analyzing astronomical data became templates for empirical research in all fields. The institutional structures created to train priests, astronomers became models for later universities and research institutions. Modern space exploration, in many ways, represents the ultimate extension of the curiosity and observational skills first developed through ancient solar and lunar worship. When we send probes to study the sun's corona or map the moon's surface, we're continuing investigations that began with prehistoric humans wondering why these celestial bodies behaved as they did. The questions that motivated ancient solar and lunar worship: what are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose in the cosmic order? Remain central to modern scientific and philosophical inquiry. We use different methods and vocabulary, but we're still seeking the same understanding of our place in the universe that drove our ancestors to build observatories and develop complex methodological systems. The social technologies developed through solar and lunar worship, methods for coordinating large groups, preserving and transmitting knowledge, creating shared meaning systems, remain relevant for addressing contemporary challenges that require collective action and long-term thinking. Climate change, pandemic response, and global economic coordination all require the kind of sustained community cooperation that ancient peoples developed through their celestial worship practices. The reverence and attention that characterized ancient relationships with the sun and moon might be exactly what we need to develop more sustainable and fulfilling relationships with the natural world. Not the specific beliefs or practices, but the underlying attitudes: careful observation, respectful attention, recognition of interdependence, and willingness to align human activities with natural cycles. The sun and moon are still there, still powerful, still mysterious despite all our scientific knowledge. They're still worth watching, celebrating, and honoring as the cosmic forces that make our brief human experience possible. We may understand more about stellar fusion and lunar geology than any ancient priest, but we could learn from their example of treating these celestial bodies as partners rather than mere objects of study. In the end, the story of why people used to worship the sun and the moon is really the story of why people needed to understand their place in the cosmos and how they developed increasingly sophisticated methods for doing so. These weren't primitive practices that we've outgrown, but foundational explorations of questions that remain as relevant today as they were 40,000 years ago. The methods have changed, but the fundamental human need to understand our cosmic context continues to drive both scientific research and spiritual seeking. Perhaps the most important lesson from ancient solar and lunar worship is that knowledge and reverence aren't opposites, but partners. The more deeply our ancestors understood celestial mechanics, the more awestruck they became by the precision and beauty of cosmic processes. Their science enhanced their spirituality, and their spirituality motivated their scientific observations. This integration of empirical investigation with emotional and spiritual response might be exactly what we need to address contemporary challenges that require both technical understanding and fundamental changes in values and behavior. We need the precision of ancient astronomical observations, combined with the reverence that motivated those observations. The sun rises tomorrow morning, just as it did for every generation of our ancestors. The moon continues its ancient dance through phases that have marked time for countless civilizations. These celestial companions that inspired humanity's first great intellectual, artistic, and spiritual achievements are still available to inspire and guide us, if we remember how to pay attention.